Hey Math 6 students, welcome to Multiplying Fractions and Whole Numbers and Multiplying Fractions. This is Mr. Delphin, and let's get started with our lesson. We've got two learning objectives for today. The first one says I can multiply fractions and whole numbers, and the second learning objective says I can multiply fractions and fractions. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the left-hand side of the notes. We're going to discuss some vocabulary for today. The first vocabulary word is fraction. And a fraction is part of a whole. So you've probably seen a fraction with a little bar like this, and you have a numerator on top and a denominator on the bottom. So the 1 is part, and the 2 is our whole. So a numerator, like I mentioned before when I introduced the concept of a fraction, a numerator is the top part of the fraction. Now if you take a look at that fraction that I wrote before, that would be the 1. So the 1 is your numerator. The third vocabulary word is called denominator, and that is the bottom of a fraction. And with my example that I gave you before, the 2 up here would be my denominator. So on the right hand side we can talk about some of the key concepts for this lesson. Our first key concept says when multiplying fractions with whole numbers, make the whole number into a fraction. So basically what that means is, say I have a number like 3. That is a whole number. If you want to make any whole number look like a fraction, you just have to give yourself a division bar and place a 1 right below it. So 3 over 1 is the same thing as 3. All you did was you made it into a fraction. So once you finish that first step, this next step is to multiply the numerators. Now remember that was the numbers on the top. Once you multiply the numerators, then you go ahead and you multiply the denominators, which were the numbers on the bottom of the fractions. And then finally, for any fraction, make sure you reduce your final answers. A lot of people tend to get the rules for adding and subtracting fractions mixed up with multiplication. You do not need common denominators. So go ahead and write that down at the very bottom of your key concepts. You don't need common denominators to multiply fractions. So we're going to use these concepts to solve the following problems. So my first problem says find 2 times 2/5. So I'm going to write 2 times 2/5 right here. Now the first part of my key concept says let's make sure any whole number is made into a fraction. So 2 is not a fraction, but it could look like a fraction by placing it over 1. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and multiply my numerators. So 2 times 2 is 4. Now I can multiply my denominators. 1 times 5 is 5. So my final answer is 4/5. And you just want to make sure you ask yourself, can you reduce 4/5? Nothing goes into both 4 and 5 evenly, so I know that my answer is completed. Example 2 says find 1/4 times 5. So I'm just going to rewrite the problem again. So 1/4 times 5. Now 1/4 is a fraction, so I don't have to worry about that, but 5 is not a fraction, it's a whole number. In order to make a whole number into a fraction, I just place a 1 right below it. Now that I have that done, I can multiply my numerators. So 1 times 5 becomes 5, so that's my numerator. Multiply denominators. 4 times 1 is 4. So let's ask ourselves, can we reduce 5 over 4? No, we can't reduce 5 over 4. But what we can do is we can make 5/4, which is an improper fraction. Remember, improper fractions have larger numerators than they do denominators. I can make an improper fraction look like a mixed number. So I'm going to take in and out. And I'm going to put the 4 on the outside and the 5 on the inside, and I'm just going to go ahead and divide. So 4 goes into 5 one time, and that's going to be a 4. When I subtract, I'm left with 1. So the way that I would write my mixed number is I would start up here. This is my whole number. So 1 is my whole number. Then I'm going to move this way. Then this other 1 becomes my numerator. Then I'm going to move back this way, and this 4 becomes my denominator. So if you give me the answer 1 and 1/4, or the answer 5/4, they are both the correct answers. So example 3 says, find 4/9 times 18. I'm going to rewrite the problem again. So 4 over 9 is my first fraction, times 18, which is a whole number. The key concept says to make that whole number into a fraction by placing a 1 below it. Now, I could sit there and multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, but I want to make my life a lot easier, and I can cross-reduce. Anytime that you have a multiplication problem, you can cross-cancel. And what that means is you can reduce your numbers in the problem. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take a look at the problems. I got 4 and 1, who are on opposite sides here, and I've got 9 and 18, who are on opposite sides. I'm going to ask myself, how many times does 9, right here, go into 9? Well, if I cross it out, 9 goes into 9 once. I'm going to leave that down there. So ask your same thing yourself, how many times does 9 go into 18? Up here. So I'm going to cross that out. 9 goes into 18 twice. So all I've done was I've reduced my fraction within the problem. If I look at the 1 and the 4, well, 1 can go into 1 one time, and 1 can go into 4 times, so I don't want to really reduce anything there because I can't. So what I can do now is I can multiply straight across. So 2 times 4 on the numerator becomes 8, and the denominators, I both have 1 times 1, well, 1 times 1 just gets me 1. So my final answer is 8 over 1, which is the same exact thing as 8. Now, what you could have done was, if you didn't want to cross-reduce and you just wanted to multiply the top numbers and the bottom numbers, you would have still got the same answer. It just would have taken you a lot longer, and you would have to reduce. So let's go ahead and pause the video, complete these got it problems, and then play the video back to get some feedback. Okay, so for example 4, the learning objective changes. It says I can multiply fractions with fractions. So I'm no longer going to be multiplying whole numbers now. I'm going to multiply 2 fractions. The rules are the same exact thing as before. It says find 1/3 times 1/4 and then write in simplest form, which basically just means to reduce. So I'm going to take my first fraction, which is 1/3, and I'm going to multiply 1/4. If I look at these 2 fractions, I can't cross-reduce, so I'm just going to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So when I multiply 1 times 1, my new numerator becomes 1. And when I multiply 3 times 4, I get 12. And I can't reduce 1/12, so that would be my final answer. So here's example 5. It says find 3/4 times 5/6. I'm going to rewrite the problem. 3/4 times 5/6. So yes, I could multiply straight across, but what I do notice is I can cross-reduce. So I'm going to take a look at this number 3 here as my numerator and this 6 as the denominator. I'm going to ask myself, can 3 go into 3? Well, yes it can. 3 can go into 3 once. Then I'm going to ask myself again, can 3 go into 6? Yes it can. 3 can go into 6 twice. Now I can't do that same exact thing with the 4 and the 5, so what I can do now is I can just go ahead and multiply straight across. So as my numerators, 1 times 5 gives me 5, and my denominator is 4 times 2, which gives me 8. And I can't reduce 5/8, so that would be my final answer. Alright, so go ahead and pause the video, complete the got it problems, and then play it back for some feedback. So now you've just completed this lesson on multiplying fractions with whole numbers and multiplying fractions. I want you to take some time to go ahead and assess how you feel after completing the lesson, and then go ahead and write this down on your blue homework sheet. If you have any questions about the lesson, go back and watch the video, or bring the questions to class tomorrow and we can discuss it.